President Barack Obama and his family visit Havana's old quarter as a three-day trip gets underway to Cuba, which hasn't seen a US president for decades. Braving the rain and tight security, locals looked on at the rare spectacle. Obama, who has abandoned a long-time US policy of trying to isolate Cuba, wants to make his policy shift irreversible, even if a Republican is elected to the White House in November. His first stop was a meeting with staff of the newly reopened US Embassy.
For the first time ever, Air Force One has landed in Cuba, and this is our very first stop. So this is a historic visit, and it's a historic opportunity to engage directly with the Cuban people and to forge new agreements and commercial deals, to build new ties between our two peoples, and for me to lay out my vision for a future that's brighter than our past.
The visit is the culmination of a diplomatic opening announced by Obama and Cuban President Raul Castro in December 2014. But there are still entrenched ideological differences, and Obama will hold talks with Castro, but not his brother, retired revolutionary leader Fidel. But that doesn't seem to worry ordinary Cubans.
More than 50 dissidents have been arrested just hours before US President Barack Obama touched down in Cuba. Members of the group The Ladies in White, who protest every Sunday in Havana, hoped to attract attention to their demands for improved human rights in the country. They were greeted by hundreds of pro-government demonstrators who shouted, "These streets belong to Fidel," in reference to the former leader. The unrest acted to highlight the problems still existing between Washington and Havana, with Ladies in White leader Berta Solder among a group of dissidents invited to meet Obama on Tuesday.
An investigation is underway into a fatal bus crash in northeast Spain in which at least 13 people were killed and 8 others were seriously injured. There were 61 passengers on board. The bus, which was carrying a large group of foreign university students, had been returning from a festival in Valencia. Our reporter says the bus that crashed was one of 5 vehicles hired for the trip. The students were mostly attached to the University of Barcelona. It's thought there are at least 20 different nationalities on board. All the victims are said to have been female, aged between 22 and 29. Catalan's Home Affairs Minister said that identification was taking time as the passengers didn't have attributed seats. He went on to say that they were proceeding with DNA tests so that they could compare potential victims' DNA to DNA found at the crash scene. The driver who survived the crash has tested negative for alcohol and drugs, but human error is suspected. The vehicle is thought to have swerved, hitting an oncoming car and then overturned. 2 people in the car were injured.
Aviation experts say the flight recorders from the passenger plane that crashed in southern Russia at the weekend were severely damaged on impact. They think it's unlikely the cockpit voice and data recorders from the FlyDubai flight will yield much information. Investigators are working through bad weather at the scene of the crash in Rostov-on-Don. The FlyDubai Boeing 737-800 came down on its second attempt at landing on Saturday. All 55 passengers and 7 crew were killed. 45 of those who died were Russian nationals. In total, there were 9 different nationalities among the victims. Bad weather, a technical fault and pilot error are among the potential causes being considered. The Greek Cypriot pilot and Spanish co-pilot had 6,000 hours of flying experience between them.
A high-profile football match in Istanbul was called off and the stadium evacuated 2 hours before kick-off on Sunday, with the Turkish authorities citing an unspecified threat. The cancellation came as the country maintains a heightened state of alert following Saturday's suicide bombing. In his first appearance since the attack, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Turkey will not give in to militants. "We will never surrender to the agenda of terror," he said. "We will defeat the terrorist organizations and the powers behind them by looking after the unity of our nation." The attack in Istanbul's most popular shopping district is the fourth such bombing in Turkey this year and the second to be blamed by the authorities on Islamist extremists. 4 people were killed on Saturday, 3 Israelis and an Iranian. The Israeli victims have now been flown back to Israel. Turkey is fighting both ISIL in neighbouring Syria and Kurdish militants in its southeast. The spate of bombings, which have killed more than 80 people, has raised questions about Turkey's ability to protect itself.
After the agreement comes the reality of the EU's deal with Turkey to cope with the migrant crisis. Some 200 people, mostly Syrians, were caught by the Turkish Coast Guard as they attempted the dangerous journey across the Aegean as the controversial deal came into force. As they were ushered into a registration centre in the coastal town of Dikili, they had one request: let us out. It's hoped the agreement would deter migrants from taking the dangerous route, but many still arrived in the early hours of Sunday.
I'm coming here. I want to go to Denmark and complete my study. I work very hard work in Turkey. I collect the money for coming here. After that, I go back to Turkey. It's very dangerous and very not good.
The deal struck on Friday means that migrants who arrive on Greek islands from the Turkish coast would be sent back to Turkey, while one Syrian already in the country would be resettled within the EU. But with the route across the Aegean closed, it may be just a matter of time before another, more dangerous route opens.
Nadia Savchenko, the Ukrainian pilot on trial in Moscow charged with complicity in the deaths of 2 Russian journalists, will hear her fate today. Savchenko faces up to 25 years in jail if found guilty. The 34-year-old, who's viewed as a national hero by many Ukrainians, has denied any involvement. The party of Kazakhstan President Nursultan Nazarbayev has won a landslide in Sunday's snap election, capturing 82% of the vote. It comes as no surprise, as Nazarbayev has run the oil-rich Central Asian nation since 1989. It's never held an election judged free and fair by Western observers. Visitors flocked to Mexico's Pyramid of the Sun on Sunday in the sacred city of Teotihuacan to perform the traditional raising of their hands during spring equinox celebrations. The idea is to receive the first rays of the sun to gather energy for the year. Believers also say it's an opportunity to connect with a forgotten past.